Sternheim. Today, the reason we're doing Karl Sternheim, or we're looking at the place, was because we had to read about Karl Sternheim when we last looked at Klaus Mann's autobiography, Der Wendepunkt, the Turning Point, and there was this section about the Sternheims, that is Pamela Wedekind, who was then married to Sternheim, and Karl Sternheim having dinner together with Klaus Mann in Baden-Baden, and I thought that was such an amusing description of Sternheim that it got me interested in Sternheim. I had never really read his plays before, and so I thought I would put him in the program. And in fact, I want to remind you of the section of Klaus Mann, and I'll read it to you in an English translation. So just to give you a little bit of context, Klaus Mann, this scene takes place in Baden-Baden in one of the very fancy restaurants. The year is 1931. Klaus Mann is 26 years old, and Pamela Wedekind Sternheim at this point is also 26, and Sternheim himself is 54 years old. Pamela is the daughter of Frank Wedekind of Lulu and Frühlingserwachen fame, and the context in Klaus Mann's autobiography is actually a discussion of mental disorders. You remember that Klaus Mann had his French friend, René Crevel, who was a poet, and who was fou, who was really crazy. Actually, a couple of years later, killed himself, and he, at that point, had published a novel, and the title of the novel was Êtes-vous fou? Are you mad? It had come out in France in 1929, and the German translation of this particular book had just appeared with Beermann Fischer in 1930. So that is the context. And there is a character in this novel by René Crevel, whose name is Vague Alarme, okay, empty in the soul, Vague Alarme. And these characters show up. So you need to remember for the first paragraph that Pamela Wedekind, daughter of Frank Wedekind, is married to Sternheim. So there's going to be a couple of interesting things. So here is the section from Klaus Mann's Turning Point that got us interested in Sternheim. This is Sternheim, or Sternheim, in 1931. Êtes-vous fou? The alarmed and alarming question came from many lips and disquieted many hearts. I heard it pronounced in many languages and contexts, cried out in anger, dropped in flippant contempt, whispered in sorrow and dread. Are you mad? If not, total übergeschnappt, which means totally mad. This is Yolanda's voice, raucous but sonorous and full of cheering cordiality. Vague Alarme's angelic companion is in reality Fräulein Thea Sternheim, my great friend Mopsa, the daughter of the demoniac playwright who married my fiancé. Okay, you remember Klaus Mann in the mid-1920s was engaged to Pamela Wedekind. Sternheim, as you will learn in a little bit later, had a daughter, Dorothea, and she became Klaus Mann's friend, Mopsa. They are all born around 1906. Only Sternheim is the one who is a little bit older. Okay? So Vague Alarme's angelic companion is in reality Thea Sternheim, my great friend Mopsa, the daughter of that demoniac playwright who married my fiancé. Pamela, consequently, is the stepmother of Mopsa, who is 2 or 3 years older than she is, actually only 1 year. But how am I akin to Mopsa's mother, popular Madame Stoisy Sternheim? She is the divorced wife of the man who married the stepmother for his guardian angel, consequently, nuts. That serves you right. Mopsa chuckles when I tell her that I am on the point of leaving for Baden-Baden, where her daddy and my ex-fiancé enjoy their honeymoon. The old man is completely pixelated, total übergeschnappt. Do you know what he wrote me the other day? That he had made up his mind to become as handsome as General von Seeckt. Sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? Okay, General von Seeckt was the commander of the Reichswehr during the First World War. Actually, not during the First World War, during 1920 to 1926. Chef der Heeresleitung der Reichswehr, General von Seeckt, so old Prussian Junker. So he wants to become as handsome as General von Seeckt. Sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? At the Stephanie in Baden-Baden, Mr. and Mrs. Sternheim received me in the dining room, all dressed up for dinner. I haven't seen either of them since I left for the journey around the world. Oh, you look fine, I say to Pamela. Not half as attractive as does His Excellency, snaps Karl Sternheim. The General, former chief of the Reichswehr, occupies the table next to ours. He's an elegant old boy, all right, all monocle and dashing mustache. Voilà un homme, Sternheim crows. Napoleon's succinct verdict in reference to Johann Wolfgang von Goethe is the only adequate formula to express the playwright's feelings toward His Excellency. Voilà un homme. You remember, this is what Goethe said to Napoleon. He is indeed remarkably well built, confirms Pamela, motionless and erect, her face with the majestic aquiline nose and the shiny eyes, mask-like and taut above a fancy collar of black lace. But now you ought to eat your soup, she adds in that glassy, hypnotizing voice of hers. Her husband, bumptious and aggressive, dwells on a comparison between the martial charm of Herr von Seeckt on the one hand and the dreary sloppiness of certain callow scribblers on the other hand. His Excellency and I, he exclaims, we belong to the family of the eagles, whereas you young fellows are just a bunch of lame ducks. That's what you are, lame ducks. Your soup, admonishes Mrs. Sternheim near Wedekind. The General, who cannot help catching some fragments of Sternheim's talk, seems amused as well as irritated. Now he whispers a few words to his lady while looking askance at our perplexing party. I know only too well what he says. Don't laugh now, Friederike, says His Excellency. Herr Sternheim just called me an eagle. Did he really? Chuckles the Baroness, total übergeschnappt. I writhe and perspire with embarrassment, while the dramatist keeps leering at our arrogant neighbor. And is he not right, the monocled warrior, to condemn an intellectual who makes an ass of himself by worshipping and wooing the saber and the mustache? What a triumph for the General, considering the reputation of Karl Sternheim as the most modern satirist, the relentless debunker of patriotic and heroic trash. And heroic trash, some debunker indeed, smitten with a monocle, fawning upon a pair of handsome epaulettes. That's why we lose the war, I feel with a sudden pang. What war is it that I'm thinking of? Our war, of course, the age-old struggle of the civilized people against the warriors. The same night, I returned to Berlin. The next news regarding Sternheim came from a sanatorium where the playwright gradually recovered from what his physicians euphemistically called complete nervous breakdown. Okay, so this Sternheim in 1931 is a very different Sternheim from the one you meet in 1910, which is when the Hose, the Underpants were written and performed then in 1911, and all the way then to Snob in 1912 and 1913, in 1912 and 1913. It's a different Sternheim. How did Sternheim get from the Underpants in 1911 as a pâté de bourgeois, expose the bourgeois, I don't know, what should I say, virtues, inverted commas, to this Sternheim, who is clearly a man on the right, was certainly exposed as such by Klaus Mann. And is there a way to see that coming? Is that not already in the place? So that would be my riddle for today. I always like to start with a riddle. Can we not already see the patriot, or not the patriot, but the one who is in love with General von, yeah, I don't want to go that far. I don't want to push it that far. Nationalist, yeah. Maybe that, I don't know. What is it about Sternheim? Why was he so out of favor? Did he not play a role in the Weimar Republic? He was not important during the Weimar Republic. He was very important in the years 1911 to 1913. Then came the war, 1914 to 1918. He returned to Germany and he was not with the program anymore. Why is that? And is it possible to see that already in Die Hose? So that would be the problem that we would have to work through, and where I would like to go after we talk a little bit about that. I would like to start with a biographical sketch of Sternheim. It's very hard to actually really get a handle on him. The other thing, why I was interested in Sternheim and what really blew my mind about him was in 1915, Karl Sternheim was given a very important prize. He was actually living in Belgium at the time because he had left Germany in 1914 because he could not take the patriotic jingoism in Germany. He was an absolute opponent of the war, could not stand it. Actually broke with Walter Rathenau, who was a good friend of his at that time, over Rathenau's organization of the natural resources for the war effort. Broke with him and moved to Belgium, as you will hear in a moment. But in 1915, he was given a very important prize, the Fontane Prize, and he accepted the prize, but he gave the prize money to Franz Kafka, whom he actually had published. Karl Sternheim, through Franz Blei and the founding of a magazine called Hyperion, was the first one to publish. It was in 1908, I believe, maybe early 1909, I think in 1908, the first 8 short pieces by Franz Kafka. So Sternheim knew quality. His favorite writers were Lessing, Flaubert, Goethe, of course, and Molière. So he had excellent taste. But none of that seems to show in the plays. So we'll have to look at that. So let me tell you a little bit about Sternheim, because it's kind of hard to really figure him out. So by his own admission, Karl Sternheim, and he knew that, was not an easy man to be with. And everybody confirms that, and he was the first to say, okay, I'm not easy. He was intense, he was needy, he was happy only when he was writing, and his physical and his mental health were always precarious. But he was also a man of utmost integrity and deep insights, and by deep insights, I mean deep insights in the way Machiavelli and Freud and Schnitzler had insights into how people ticked and what they really wanted out of life. He understood the structure of society, but only of the Wilhelminian era, but not of the Weimar Republic. And he did not subscribe, and that is a great point in his favor, to any ideologies. The Weimar Republic was a highly ideologized time, and he did not subscribe to any ideologies that promised to cure society of its ills. He didn't believe that it could be done, and that made progressives dislike him quite a bit. In terms of when he was born in 1878, that would make him an exact contemporary of Martin Buber, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, Hermann Hesse, Thomas and Heinrich Mann. Those are his peers. The generation that's just a bit older is the generation of Freud and of Schnitzler. Freud born in 1856 and Schnitzler in 1862. So that's the elder generation. But his peers are Buber, Hofmannsthal, Hesse, and the Mann. Sternheim was born in Leipzig in April 1878. His mother was a Lutheran. Her family had been printers in Saxony, and they were solid Kleinbürgertum, petit bourgeoisie. His father, however, was descended from a Jewish family of bankers in Frankfurt, and one branch of the Goldschmidt family produced Heinrich Heine, and the other branch produced Karl Sternheim. The relationship is that Sternheim's great-great-grandmother was the sister of Heine's grandmother. So it's a far-away relation, but he was very aware of that and very proud of that fact. 4 months before Karl Sternheim was born, his grandfather died, and his father had to take over the declining banking house in Hanover. Karl's parents did not get married until Karl was a year and a half old, and another sister had already arrived, and his mother was already pregnant with a 3rd child. The marriage, and that is why the marriage was delayed, of a Jewish banker to a Lutheran printer's daughter was regarded as a mismatch, and a mismatch on both sides. Jewishly, you can't really marry a Lutheran who is basically out of the Kleinbürgertum, and for the people from the Kleinbürgertum, it was kind of iffy at that time to marry a Jewish banker. So on both sides it was perceived as a mismatch, but it was love, and the marriage actually held fast. And Karl didn't really care, but after his father died, and after his father died, he married Rosa Marie Flora Franke in December 1879. So Sternheim grew up in Hanover and Berlin, Hanover and Berlin. His parents were ordinary German patriots. They loved Bismarck, and they also liked a little bit the Kaiser, but they really liked Bismarck. And they were very far from anything with culture, except music. And of course, they listened to Wagner. So Bach, Mozart, Wagner, those were the people that they listened to, sort of like Symphoniekonzerte, so something like that. That's what they liked, but they were very far from literature. Sternheim was alienated from his father, had absolutely no connection to him, but adored his mother, who was practical and supportive and very loving. The mother eventually had 6 children, but her firstborn, Karl, remained her absolute favorite. Except for music, Sternheim received no intellectual stimulation or encouragement at home. He was completely indifferent to school, and he didn't pass the final exams, the Abitur, at the gymnasium on his first try, but neither did Thomas Mann. So at the age of 16, he was sent off to another city, all by himself, to sort of repeat the Abitur, and then he managed that. Sternheim early on knew that he wanted to be a writer. He had begun writing poetry in short plays when he was 18. And the father, of course, insisted that he had to have a sensible profession, a Brotberuf. And in October, like Jura would have been a good thing, studying the law would have been good. In October 1897, Sternheim was 19 years old, and he was finally able to get away by enrolling at the University of Munich. So once he arrives in Munich, which of course 1897, you can imagine, was very sophisticated. Also, you had to have some sort of money if you wanted to be in some circles. But he went there really as a country bumpkin, actually quite uneducated, but with some aspirations. And he studied philosophy and history of literature, but his studies left him completely cold. They were not connected to anything that was in any way important to him. Had no really, what he looked at had no emotional and intellectual weight for him. Of course not, because he didn't really come equipped from the home to have these things make sense to him. He moved to other universities, to Göttingen, to Leipzig, to Jena, to Berlin, but it was really the same anywhere or everywhere. He could not learn from academics. He had to acquire what he needed and what he wanted to know on his own. So all his life, Sternheim remained an autodidact who dipped into economics and politics and science and explored the developments of the art. What he learned on his own was very good, and he did acquire really very sophisticated taste in literature. It was not easy to like Flaubert, but he did had a real understanding also of Molière. He became very fluent in French, so he did acquire education on his own, but it was not the kind of education that Thomas Mann, for example, would be going for. Now, the advantage of studying on his own, and that's really relevant, is that he didn't get stuck in a group. So if you study on your own, you're not connected to a group who's moving in the same direction. You're not going to go to have a beer, or go to a cafe, or go to the theater, or go to a cabaret. You are really doing this on your own. So it's, you don't get stuck in a group, you don't get stuck in a school or an ideology. That allows you, and we can see this, I think, in Die Hose, to see society from the outside. The disadvantage is that you also don't get to hang out with the cutting edge. You are also always with that which is already part of the culture. You don't get to be with the cutting edge where culture is being made. That too, I think, shows in his losing track at some point around 1915 with what is culturally going on in Germany. So he didn't really make the connection, and his mind really, during those years in Munich, 1897, and then when he comes back in sort of 1902, wasn't honed, and he wasn't exposed to sharp and oppositional thoughts of the young. So all his life, Sternheim remained largely a party of one. And one can't shake the impression that intellectually, like, he was a little bit thin at a time when people were absorbing, or young people were absorbing, huge amounts of cultural information. Some of it actually quite esoteric. I'm thinking of circles that were around at that time. Do you think of Stefan George in Munich at the time and in Heidelberg at the time? Or think about Huber and Rosenzweig in Frankfurt. Those were circles that were highly intellectual. They would have been available to him, but Sternheim wasn't moving socially in those groups. Or you can take a look at another writer we already read, Alfred Döblin, who's exactly the same age, born in 1878, and comparing the biographies really shows you just how culturally undernourished in certain ways Sternheim was. Döblin was born in 1878 in Szczecin, in Stettin, which was very provincial. He was also, like Sternheim, saddled with the sense that he was déclassé, that he was not part of the culture, that he was an outsider. And like Sternheim, Döblin was doing very poorly in school, but Döblin compensated his indifference to formal studies by turning into a passionate reader. He moved into Spinoza, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Kleist, Hölderlin, Dostoevsky. Those were the people who were essential to Dublin and formed his thinking. None of that really, you could say, made an impact. None of those writers really made an impact on Sternheim. So what seems to be missing from Sternheim's life are intellectual passions. Intellectual passions. He had social passions, he had other passions, but intellectual passions, no. So Sternheim published his first play at the age of 20 in 1898. It was called Der Heiland, the Savior, and was a well-made little nothing. Sternheim's guiding lights were Ibsen and Molière. Of course, they were part of the culture, so no surprises here. Around that time, Sternheim also began to fall in love with French literature, Flaubert, one of the major writers for him. In 1900, Sternheim married a 19-year-old daughter, Eugenie Haut, of a vintner and wine merchant from Düsseldorf, and settled with his wife in, you will not guess it, Weimar. And that just goes to show just how out of the culture he was. So in 1900, he picks Weimar, of all places, to settle with his wife. Of course, he has a little bit of money because Eugenie has money from her, you know, if you're daughter of a wine merchant, you are not poor. This really just shows, when settling in Weimar, how far Sternheim was from the center of culture. He continued to write plays and stories that are a little bit critical, but mainly elegant and frivolous. By 1902, Sternheim understood that Weimar was a dead end, and he moved to Berlin. His marriage was already in crisis. Both partners suffered from nervous disorders and took off into different sanatoriums. At that time, the diagnosis would have been neurasthenia. Even Robert Musil, you remember, was diagnosed just around that time with neurasthenia, or that's the same. Berliners, of course, made fun of that. Hasthenie und Rasthenie, dann Hasthenie und Neurasthenie. No, this cannot be translated, okay? Hasthenie und Rasthenie. Don't make haste and don't rest, then you never have neurasthenia. Okay, so these two people were both crazy, and they went off into different sanatoria, basically leaving their little kids, which they already had at that time, two of them, to the nannies. I mean, you know, you have to get a sense of the craziness. I mean, it's insane. So these two, okay, parents are both in their own insane asylums, or sanatorium, as they're called, being parked there and feeling okay. In 1900, 1902 actually, saw the first performance of one of Sternheim's plays, Krugdorf. I think there's an allusion to Kleist here, zerbrochene Krug, so it's basically an analysis of how the bourgeoisie, the failings of the bourgeoisie, and it was performed actually at a major theater, not so major provincial, but among the provincial theaters, a good theater, am Königliche Theater in Dresden, the Royal Court Theater in Dresden, Königliche Hoftheater. The play was well received, and Sternheim used it to boost his luck, or try to boost his luck, in persuading Otto Brahm, then the pioneer of naturalist theater productions, to take one of his plays. Otto Brahm actually was the lover of Lili Deutsch's sister. Lili Deutsch is married to the Rathenau's competitor at AEG. So Otto Brahm is going to be in the circle where Sternheim will be in about 3 years. Okay, so Otto Brahm, everybody had a lover in those days. So the higher your lover was placed, the better it was. I mean, it was an absolutely crazy time. So Otto Brahm turns down the plays. Otto Brahm is someone who pioneered plays like by Hauptmann and by Ibsen at the Lessing Theater in Berlin, but he wasn't interested in Sternheim's plays because Sternheim, of course, was outside any circle. He was a nobody, and he didn't come with a group of friends or a recognizable circle of intellectuals. So why should Brahm take his place? There's hundreds of playwrights, So what I'm saying is that literature is also, how good something is very often determined by who's presenting it. There is a sentence that Karl Kraus said about a poem by Franz Werfel when there was a big brouhaha when Sidonie von Dorn became Kraus's lover, and made some comments about Werfel being just a Jew, and then there was a big to-do about that, and at some point Kraus said, ein Gedicht ist nur so lange gut, bis man weiß, von wem es ist. And a poem is only good as long until you know from who it's from. Okay, so that was sort of like well known. So I'm playing a little bit with that. So Sternheim really was a nobody at that time, and the early plays actually, before 1902, they were all about pleasure and despair and desire and renunciation and all that, you know, turn of the century decadent stuff. And then by 1902, very suddenly, this play comes out. It's called Das Eiserne Kreuz, the Iron Cross, and it reflects the conviction that fulfillment can be achieved by sailing under one's own steam, that you can make it, that you have to be self-reliant, and that you can make it. So that was a huge shift in 1902. He was just about to come into his own, to insist against the establishment. He was already seeing that there was an establishment against which he could not go, that you could make it, that you could be independent. In 1903, and that's really the key year now, in 1903, Sternheim's life was about to change, and disproving incidentally that his newfound thesis that fulfillment and happiness could be achieved without help, where, you know, disproved that thesis that you could succeed on your own. In May 1903, Sternheim was married. He was married and he had 2 young children. He had just finished, or had just been dismissed for health reasons from military service, and he meets 20-year-old Thea Bauer. May 1903. She is also married to Arthur Löwenstein. Arthur Löwenstein is 10 years older than she is, and she had a little girl, Agnes Löwenstein. And Sternheim meets this Thea Löwenstein, and he is absolutely smitten. And so she becomes later the first Thea Sternheim, and this Thea Sternheim is absolutely extraordinary. Not only is she beautiful, she is smart, she's artistic, and she's actually kept a diary. We have the diary, and the diary is extraordinary. So of course, like this is a woman's diary, it was published very late, but we do have it now. And so she's beautiful, she's lively, she's interested in the arts, she's a very competent judge of literary quality, and Sternheim is smitten and he pursues her. Both of them, of course, being married. It takes a while for Thea to respond to Sternheim, because I mean, he is really crazy. But after several months, and he has something, he has a charm for women, women fall for him, and he had many lovers throughout his life. So after several months, Thea succumbs to Sternheim's charm, and Sternheim is absolutely transformed. He's a new man. He is thankful to her. She becomes part of his essence. And here's what Sternheim writes, and this is in German. Ich hatte mich ja vollständig verloren und habe mich wieder ganz und gar. Durch dich einzig, aber du hast mich gelehrt, an mich zu glauben, weil du an mich glaubtest. Du hast mich frei gemacht. I had lost myself entirely, but now I have found myself totally, ganz und gar. Durch dich einzig, only through you, because you taught me to believe in myself, because you believed in me. You set me free. So it's very intense. So he found this one person through whom he could build up self-confidence and actually really believe that even though all of his plays, he's written many, many plays, they were all turned down. He has had only one performance of a play in 1902. He has no money, he's déclassé, he's outside any circle, but he believes in himself that he is going to be a writer. There is incredible strength to that. When we later go and look at these Maske, Theobald Maske, okay, and we're looking at how the character is designed, you need to remember this moment. In 1902, he has this one performance, and in 1903, he pursues this absolutely accomplished woman. Because he is in love, and she turns to him for whatever reason. She has a successful life in Berlin. She's beautiful. She doesn't need anything. She's got money. She's got a girl. She's got a husband. She's got all of it. And she turns to this guy, and he is thankful and says this, you believed in me, and through you I found myself. This is probably the highest moment in his life. And then here is what happens afterwards. Since both of them were married with children, and both of their partners agreed to let them have the affair. Neither of their partners wanted to get divorced. Not Sternheim's wife didn't want to get divorced, and Löwenstein also didn't want to get divorced. Yeah, I wouldn't have want to divorce Thea. No, of course not. Okay, so, but the affair continues, and the scene gets really pretty messy. For two years, it's quite messy. In January 1905, Thea gave birth to Karl's daughter, who is also called Dorothea, but Löwenstein. Okay, because Thea is continuing to live with Arthur Löwenstein, but she tells him, this is not your child, this is Sternheim's child. He said, I don't care, you are mine, okay, so you stay with me. Okay, so Theodor Löwenstein, and this Dorothea Löwenstein would become Klaus Mann's friend Mopsa. This is later your Thea Sternheim, second Thea Sternheim, that's Mopsa. That's the beginning of Mopsa, we just heard about her. Sternheim, meanwhile, separated from his wife in July of 1905, so now his daughter is 7 months old, and a divorce was granted in January 1906. But Löwenstein held on to Thea. He said if she divorced him, she couldn't take her older daughter with her, Agnes, and that was tough. That's tough for a mom. You have a little girl, and you got the girl or the man, but you also have a daughter from the other guy. So it's very messy. So Thea continued to live in Berlin, while Sternheim moved into a hotel in Freiburg. And he writes more plays, and they also find no echo. And now he writes, and he is in this hotel, and he's about ready to jump out the window. Ich zweifle manchmal, bin ich ein Dichter oder bin ich ein Idiot? Ein Hammel, der sich mit Sachen brüstet, die er nicht versteht. Es ist am Ende lauter Unsinn, den ich schreibe. So now he's completely at the nadir. I doubt sometimes. Sometimes I really have doubts in myself. Am I a poet or am I an idiot? Am I an ass who is bragging about things that he doesn't understand? In the end, it might be complete nonsense, the things that I'm writing. So he's in Freiburg in this hotel, and life is no good. Finally, Thea decides to leave Löwenstein. She was divorced in December 1906, and she married Sternheim in July 1907 and gave birth to their son Klaus in 1908. So both children, Mopsa and Klaus, were stunningly beautiful. If you ever see pictures of them, stunning beauties, very dark, sensual beauties, very Jewish looking, and just gorgeous, gorgeous children. In the winter of 1906 and 1907, Thea and Karl moved to Munich. What Karl Sternheim could not know when he fell for Thea was that she was going to be immensely wealthy, very, very wealthy. When her father died in 1906, she inherited 2 million Reichsmark. That was an absolute fortune at that time. And of course, if you now think back and you look at the time, and the divorce comes at the time when the father is dead, so being financially independent made it a lot easier for her to pursue that divorce. So when the money arrives, okay, everything changes. Okay, please think about the Snob and all of those plays. Okay, when the money arrives, okay, Sternheim was determined to spend it just in the right way. Okay, what do you think he did with the money? Okay, you're living in Munich? Huh?
A big house.
Buys a house, absolutely correct, because around that time also Thomas Mann buys a house. So he buys a house, he buys a plot, and it becomes an enormous castle just outside Munich, okay? And it is actually designed by Thea, who is also very gifted as an interior decorator and as an architect. When in the end, the fine work is done by an architect, but she designed this palace, and it is called Belle Maison, okay? Beautiful house. And sure enough, the literary, musical, and otherwise cultural avant-garde followed the call of the money and came flocking to Belle Maison, okay? I mean, it's absolutely astounding, okay? The avant-garde, never interested in money, but when Sternheim has Belle Maison, there they are, eating free sandwiches. I mean, it's just like unbelievable. Okay, so it had helped, of course, that Sternheim had financed the cultural magazine Hyperion. I already told you a little bit about this, which was edited by Franz Blei, and it published, and this is also where the writers go. I mean, they're completely, of course, indifferent to money, but they published a coterie of fine art connoisseurs, and as I mentioned earlier, those 8 prose works by Franz Kafka. Now, through Franz Blei, and this is the transformative moment, through Franz Blei, Sternheim meets Max Reinhardt. Max Reinhardt is the successor of Otto Brahm, and he is the leading theater director in his day, and of course, Max Reinhardt immediately accepts Die Hose without changes. to be performed at a major theater in Berlin. And the first performance in Berlin took place on February 15, 1911, and in Munich on October 19, forget which October, mid-October 1911. And of course they were also censored and they had to be shut down. And the Snob followed in February 1914. Both were directed by Max Reinhardt. Now Sternheim is in the center of culture. He has arrived. He is also friends at this time, and this is also through the money with Walter Rathenau, who at this time is in a huge crisis because he's been friends with Maximilian Harden for 18 years, and that has just they have just parted ways, and it was always very difficult for Rathenau, who was not married, to lose a friend. So now in 1911. Sternheim has two plays, has his play performed at the Deutsche Theater in Berlin, at the Kammerspiel in Munich. So the questions now, so we're going to go break for you to talk about the plays. Who exactly was this Sternheim? What was he really thinking? What were his ideas? Who is this guy? Very hard to know what he was really after. Okay. I can tell you how it all came out at the end, but I want to, because I've spoken for a very long time, I'd like to hear what you made of the plays.
Well, you must have done some reading in the intro, because he's parodying everyone, particularly Nietzsche.
Yeah, that's good. Let me just get it on. Literary parodies. Where do you see it? Where do you see the parody of Nietzsche?
Well, in the Beyond Good and Evil ideas of Nietzsche, the master morality and the slave morality, in the second play,
yeah.
The son is talking about having no pity and being different, and you know, I mean, there's a lot of playing back and forth between, are the aristocrats better, or are the individual bourgeoisie better? But they all seem to feel that they have the right to have their own separate morality because they're better. They're the master people, and they're the master morality, which is an idea that. And
in fact, the term Herrenmoral and Sklavenmoral are actually. I mean, you probably read it in English. I mean, they are Nietzschean quotes, and they are actually cited in text. That's true. Okay, so literary parody. So so that's one. Nietzsche as an influence. Okay, that's one. So thinking that the upper crust in society is entitled to certain forms of behavior, whereas the lower classes are not.
Well, but I think that
I
think he disagrees with that idea.
Right.
And I mean, the hero of the first play is clearly the bourgeois gentilhomme, but
Theobald Maske, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But of course, he's the opposite of Moliere's bourgeois gentilhomme.
That's probably him. I don't know what that is. Okay, so we have Theobald Maske. Okay, he is our hero. What makes him a hero?
Well,
is he really a hero? What's the play about? So we're looking really at a sequence of 3 plays that weren't conceived together, but it so turns out that they interlink very well, and they are a chronological sequence, because Christian Maske turns out to be is of course Theobald's son. Okay, so but the first play, which focuses on Theobald's generation, is different in kind and in focus from the other 2 plays, which focus on Christian Maske's ascent. So let's focus on this first play first, if I may. So Nietzsche is on the table, literary parody is on the table, and Theobald Maske as hero, which is really funny that you would say that he's the hero. What makes him the hero? That is actually really turns out to be the essential question. Who are they? What and who has counterparts?
I have a theory.
Yes, go. Okay, and before you say your theory and probably spill it all out, can I have some other voices? Stuart, any thoughts on that?
You mentioned at the beginning of the class about the performance of Strauss's Ein Heldenleben.
Yeah.
The title of that tone poem is exactly the title that Sternheim gave to his series of plays, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
Did you happen to look up when Bürgerliche Heldenleben was composed. Ein Heldenleben
was about
Strauss.
15 years earlier.
15 years earlier. Okay, so he would have known that, right? And he would have known the title.
And the tone poem is a description of the life of this sort of noble symbol,
Yeah.
who is so the architect German character, who goes off to war, fights for his country, and then lives a peaceful life and ends it in 6 chapters.
Mm-hmm.
I see Sternheim is tipping that on its head. The heroes here are pompous.
This guy's pompous? Oh no. Okay, let's just put the other characters on here. Okay, let's just make the structure of it, then we can figure out where he is in relation to the others, because in a play you have to always look at who's around. So we have Scaron, right?
Do you realize that the...
and then we go, I want to go pursue this head.
It's a different set of characters in the Martin translation. Did you know
I
that?
can't hear you.
It's a different set of characters
In what?
in the Steve Martin.
Oh, Steve Martin is a complete rewrite.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with Sternheim.
It says based on Sternheim. I don't know about
It
that.
is based on Sternheim, but we're not talking about Steve Martin. It's an Americanization of that play. We need to look at the German first.
Yeah,
and then what would be really interesting to do, and I didn't get my copy of Steve Martin, I ordered it and it never came, would be to look at what did Steve Martin do with the play to make it American. This is a very German play, and I want to pursue what Stuart was saying, and I want to pursue also because you were playing the precursor to Ariadne auf Naxos, which is, as I told you when we were doing the 1913 concert, is a take on Molière's Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme, which is about a bourgeois who wants to become an aristocrat and makes him a fool of himself because he goes higher than his own class. Okay, so which means that you can be determined by your class, and if you have aspirations into the next higher class, you make a fool of yourself. And somebody just said, it was you, that he turns this on its head. That is absolutely right. Okay, so what is turned on its head?
What we idealize.
What we idealize? No, it's even more precise. Okay, what we idealize. We could go this way. We can play with that. What we idealize is turned on its head. How? Do we idealize the aristocrats?
Characters as a buffoon.
I don't think so.
Who is a buffoon? Scaron.
Theo and his son. Who knows if it's his son or not? If it's the son of the.
Okay, let's not talk about the son right now. We talk about Christian in a minute. Okay, because this play is before.
He's occupied with whether he wants to continue the generations, or whether he earns enough money in any particular week. And he bases his life on the bottom line of his budget.
That's right, but that is exactly what makes him a hero.
Mm-hmm.
Tell that to Congress.
Okay, let's go figure this out. Okay, let's just go figure out this. Let's go put these other two guys here. Then we have Mandelstam. Okay. We need to figure out what makes this guy a hero. We have the wife. What's her name? Clara? No, Louisa. Louisa, of course. I'm pretty sure Louisa, of course. Why should it be called Clara? Louisa. And we have Gertrude. Or Deuter. Gertrude, Deuter. Okay, so those are the characters. Okay? Okay, what actually happens? I mean, the dynamics of this play are unbelievable. It is very clever play. Very clever. What happens? Let's just go figure this out. Just what is the inner motor of the play? What's the motor of the play? She loses her pants, which you think is very funny.
Oh yes, well.
You told me you peed in your pants when you thought it was so funny.
Right, I only read the.
Oh, you only read the Steve Martin version?
The Steve Martin version, but I could comment that the focus for me was Louisa and Gertrude. That's the humorous focus.
Very cool. That is very cool. So these two we also have to look at. Okay, let's look at what is the motor of the play. She drops the pants. Okay, what's the reaction?
Embarrassment.
For whom? For him?
Theobald.
Ah, no. Okay.
After her.
No, he says to her exactly what? He uses a very particular word, which unfortunately you can't know because it's in German, Liederlichkeit. He is accusing her, and this is a very important word, we're going to write it on his nose, of Liederlichkeit. Okay, Barbara, help me explain the semantic field of liederlich.
She's sloppy, she's immoral,
sloppy,
and it's immoral.
Right, and there is a shading off into being a slut. Okay? That you do it for sexual enticement. To be liederlich is to be unordentlich, is to be schlampig, little dirty, but also sexually alluring and
yeah, but in a cheap way.
Little in a cheap way. It has sexual connotations to be liederlich, which can be enticing to some guys. It also means to be erotically attractive in a certain way. So she loses those pants, okay, and he accuses her of Liederlichkeit. That accusation is going to have a function, and it has the function of chastising her, of keeping her down. He's got, in the bourgeois thinking, something against her. Okay? He can accuse her of being liederlich. He is on top of her. He shows her who the master is because he is also proper. Liederlich is the opposite of being proper. Okay? The improper Bostonian, that's liederlich. Okay? Good. He's got that. Okay. What happens after that? Two guys show up who are attracted to her Liederlichkeit. Okay? They are sexually aroused and they look where she lives and guess what? Room for rent. Metaphor, metaphor. Room for rent. Okay, so they come and there is something that they want. And guess what? Theobald is going to sell it to them. Yes? He's gonna, if he had been really concerned about his wife's Liederlichkeit, would he rent a room to two single guys? Oh no. Okay, so these two guys show up and they want something, the forbidden fruit that he just made forbidden because she's accusing her of Liederlichkeit. Okay, she too, she also doesn't want it. She's very proper. But this one tells her, why would you not want it? It's so good. Okay, so this one says, I tell you how to do it because I have no one. She's a single woman and I really want it. And if you have it and you tell me about it, I can live vicariously through you. It's like virtual sex. It's like internet. It's fantastic. It's internet before the internet. She can have it all. That's so this one is setting up this one to entice those guys. Okay, that's great. That's basic comedy right now. Okay, but the guys who show up are really vermischt. That's a Yiddish word for being a little fool. Okay, not quite with the program. Who shows up?
An aristocrat?
An aristocrat. Oh, an aristocrat. Okay, and now we're in the field of parody. Now we're in pure Molière. We are really in the field of literary parody. Nietzsche's there, Molière's there. They're all there. They're all there. Okay, this guy shows up. Okay, and she is now willing. She's prepared by this one. Of course, it's Shakespeare. Okay, Polonius and all the Pandarus and all the Pandora. Okay, she's a Pandora. They all, she is not prepared, and she really, well, she's ready for the adventure. She's ready. And okay, so here, this is a guy she has chosen, and
he only wants to use her as a muse.
Okay, and this one only wants to use her as a muse. That is, he's a writer. Okay, so here's the parody of the writers. He's a writer, and his writing has to be based on experience. But whenever she's ready for the experience, he's off writing. Okay, so this is, of course, satire on the writing life and the satire on the artist, which is these artists are always pretending to say that they are doing all this art for this great art, and it is sort of like a culmination of experience, and the experience flows into it. I don't know, emotional recollective tranquility is a poem. I guess that's Wordsworth. But you know, they never come to the climax because they're always off writing. Okay, so there's some Freud. You can go take some Freudian analysis of what art is. It's sort of like all sublimated because if you did have your climax in real life, you would be writing about it. Okay, so we got this guy who is doing this, but he pays big bucks. I'm assuming he put it as $1,000. I forget what he pays. Okay, at the end. All right, good. Okay, so that's called, ultimately trafficking because he pays for the erotic inspiration, even though there is no climax. Now this guy is a really poor schnock. So what does he want? Mandelstamm. Very interesting, by the way. There's a very cool researcher by the name of Sander Gilman who has written extensively about the perception of Jews in late 19th century and early 20th century Germany. And he has a whole characterization of the perception of Jews, and they all apply to Mandelstamm in a certain way. He is effeminate, emasculated, weak. He has TB. He has, and he's a nebbish, and he's a parasite, and he basically just wants to
denies his Jewishness.
And he denies he's Jew, but it all comes with it, and he is buried as Jewish self-hatred. I mean, yes, of course the guy's Jewish, sure. I mean, but he pretends not to be, which leads us to the assimilation problem in the next place. So yes, it's Mandelstamm, and so this guy basically wants sex, but really only just via the internet, so that by I don't know, virtually, which really doesn't mean virtually, I mean it does. And then this guy Mandelstamm really wants a caretaker. He wants a good room and he wants a mama to take care of him. Okay, so he also wants something from this one. Okay, now what do these guys bring? They bring big dollars. Okay, so ultimately the machine, what drives this is that his wife's sexual attractiveness, which Theobald keeps out of reach, brings in the money. And only after he has achieved financial stability can he afford, will he agree to create a child with her. This is the climax of the thing. I'm going to now give you this child while he himself does what?
He has an affair with her.
Yeah, and he has his sexual satisfaction with Gertrude. And this one is kept, you know, busy with the child. Now, if you think about Emma Bovary, it's clear. She has all these grand illusions. You think about her as an Emma Bovary character, okay, in love with Rodolfo. Oh, no, it's not Rodolfo, Rudolph. She is the one, and this is when Thea Sternheim saw the play. She says, I can't understand why people are laughing. It's so tragic for Louise. Because she's lost the illusion. She has nothing. She is cooped up, married to this guy, with a child. Where is her fun? And these guys are not delivering. So she is the one for whom this is really a tragedy. And she's the winner, and he's the winner. Okay, what makes him a hero?
Because he is who he is. Because
that's
he
right.
is who he is.
This is exactly right. Because, and now we can actually look at there is a quote, if you have your books. The important act, the important Aufzug, the important whatever scene or act is always Act 3. Is you're always being given the keys there, and for me it's sort of in page 82.
Yeah, but even that.
Let me just I just want to make it clear that it's in the text, and just make sure that we're on the same page.
Is your watch coming apart?
Am I coming apart?
Your watch.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those fancy watches that always come apart. Okay, thank you very much. It's sort of like flips, and then you can put a picture of the lover in the back or something. You can look at be inspired. So kind of, but it's blank. I'm just like Louise. Okay, so page 82 for me. And he says there, so he has this, it's actually a really great, when one could sort of like read this with, with different people reading it. It is one of the absolute great scenes in here. So it's like Act 3, Scene 1, where they are discussing the philosophy behind it all. And he says there, okay, hier ist ja einverstanden, sagt wenn mag. Nur gibt es aber Wesen, für die ist ein Platz wie der andere und vor allem benötigen sie den, an denen sie stehen. Mit dem, was mir von Geburt beschieden ist, mit dem, was mir die Geburt beschieden, bin ich an meinem Platz in günstigster Lage und seine bis zum Tod gewiss unterscheide ich mich nicht allzu sehr von meinen Kollegen im ganzen Vaterland. Meine Ununterscheidbarkeit oder meine Unscheinbarkeit ist die Tarnkappe, unter der ich meiner eigenen Natur frönen darf. Okay, that is the core. With whatever was given to me by birth, I am in my space and I am in the best possible position, and I am sure of what I have when I'm in my space until death, and I will not be distinguished from anybody else in my fatherland. And my indistinguishability, meine Unscheinbarkeit, my not standing out, is my, Harry Potter would say, my invisibility cloak, meine Tarnkappe. Here we have a Wagnerian term, a Tarnkappe, obviously. And underneath this invisibility cloak, I can do just what I want. Okay, that is the core. Now we're going back to Nietzsche, okay? And we have there are only two philosophical tenets that Sternheim has. And one of them is that everybody has a core, and that core is immutable. Let me give you a description of how Sternheim sees die Hose. Okay, that is his description of die Hose. Ein kleiner Beamter in plüschener Welt weiß, Peinlichkeiten von außen zu entgehen, genügt es, Plüsch unter Plüsch zu scheinen. Das begreift er mit aller Welt. Neu aber für sich allein weiß er als unerhörtes Geheimnis, führt man sich nach außen hinreichend mitbürgerlich und psychologisch auf, darf man nach innen brutal, bronzen, ja ein zyklopischer, zu sich selbst gewillter Viechskerl sein, Leben zu eigenen Nutzen und Formen abweiten. Okay, now I'm going to give you the English translation, and that is the core, that is the definition of hero according to Sternheim, and there are some issues with that. Now we'll talk a little bit about Nietzsche after that, and then we can go to Musk, and you will be able to figure it out really quickly. An insignificant, small-time civil servant knows that in order to escape from unpleasantness coming at him from the outside, it is sufficient to appear like plush, velveteen, amidst plush, velveteen. If you imagine a Victorian drawing room with all the velveteen type pillows and the ruchen and all that, it's like that. You appear like that. That he understands along with everyone. What is new, however, is that he has a secret he keeps to himself, which is, if toward the world you behave in a civil, decent, psychological fashion, mitbürgerlich und psychologisch. You can be brutal in private, you can be brassy, yes, like a cyclops, a brute person, his inner will and you can profit from life to your own advantage. That is, for Sternheim, to be a hero. Of course, he's ironic about that, okay? So you are keeping up appearances. It's really just your old Victorian Doppelmoral, double moral standards. He keeps up appearances by calling his wife liederlich. This is his mask. When he calls her liederlich, it appears as if he is subscribing to the standards of propriety. But underneath that mask, he does what he wants, and nobody can find out about it. Okay? What makes him a hero is that he is content with that because he has recognized that this is his essence. He doesn't want more, doesn't need more, he wants the money, he wants a nice bed to sleep in with a great woman inside, and that he is satisfied with. And you are a hero when you recognize your limits and you're okay with that. That is the bürgerliche Held. Of course, it's high satire for Sternheim, but then it's not satire because it's also true.
Well, but it's satire because Nietzsche uses this rationale so that the master race can do what they want.
That is correct. But
they escape slave morality, and the justification is become what you are.
That's right. But Nietzsche ended up in an insane asylum and happy. And you know what? This guy is happy.
Yeah.
And to be happy, that makes him a hero because he's got everything he wants. And only the intellectuals are dissatisfied, people like Nietzsche. Of course, Nietzsche is sophisticated and way beyond that.
Well, Nietzsche didn't go crazy because he had that idea.
No, of course it's a syphilitic.
No, but it's ironic that this man, who clearly represents the slave morality, I mean, he's a lower class person, that he's using the upper class rationale for being who you are and doing what you want.
But you know how Nietzsche understands that the people who have the slave morality ultimately get the upper hand of the people with the heaven moral, because they are so content, and because they are so content with so little, and they are deeply satisfied. When you're satisfied, you need to find out who you are. Now, okay, in taking this as our basis, okay, if you now go to Christian Maske, you switch to the Snob, okay? At the end of this, when do we stop? We stop at 7:30, right? Yeah, okay. At the end, Father Maske, Theobald, pops up again. Okay, we will talk about the Maske play now. About the Snob. And he says, in deep appreciation of his son, that he has, du hast das maskische Prinzip noch ein paar Löcher weiter geschnallt. So he took the essence of what it is to be a maske, a person like this who has a front and an inner side and is content with that, and you have put it on a higher level, to a higher degree, a different quality, a higher quality. Still the same Maske, but boy, zwei Löcher weiter geschnallt. Okay, I want to tell you two things. There's really only two dramaturgical principles that are important for Sternheim to understand, and you actually already have them, and there are two. And that actually goes now to the issue, why was Sternheim irrelevant in the Weimar Republic? What is it about him that one feels is deeply, deeply scary about his place? There is something deeply scary about that perception, because you feel on the one hand it's satire, and on the other hand you know that he thinks this is right, and that is the guiding principle. That ambivalence that you can feel in this place made people dislike Sternheim very much. He was hated by the bourgeoisie, and he was disliked by the progressives. Because what this analysis we just did is also impervious to being politically ideologized. There's no way you can get it economically. You can no get it it's impervious to idealism, because it just is. It's the way really very close to Nietzschean thinking. Now, there are two concepts that he has. The first concept that he has is that each self has an immutable core. And he picks up something, a concept from Nietzsche, that Nietzsche calls die eigene Nuance. Okay, let me read you a little something from what he says. Wenn wir an eine tiefste Wahrheit in jedem Menschen glauben, if we are believing in a deepest truth in each human being, and for this deepest truth, deepest core of immutable core in a human being that you can call the truth, you can call anything you want. Nietzsche uses die eigene Nuance, its own nuance, okay? Wie kann da die Welt durch Geschehnisse noch auf einen wirken? If each person has such a immutable core, how can the happenings, the events of the world have an effect on you? Either it is immutable or it's not immutable. And if it is immutable, and there is a truth to human beings, such as that you can be satisfied with this, and you can be satisfied with money, how can it be? How could the world affect you? That's why we don't have any outside world. We have no historical context to display, if you really think about that. That's one thing. And he then says, Einsicht in das Gesetz der eigenen Person muss das Handeln bestimmen. The only thing that will determine how you act is an insight into what your own truth is. Not the outside world, not economics, not morality, not religion, nothing. But a determination of what it is that makes you tick. And what makes you tick is immutable. That's a very scary perception of a person, because it means that a person is always stable and always the same. Now, if you have a bad perception of someone, let's say the Jews, then that's immutable. So there is a scariness here that he is positing or positioning or claiming a concept of a person that cannot be changed through other influences, but that he truly believes in. In addition, now he has a second thought, okay? A second thought. And that comes out in the Muscat place, and that is the reduction of multiplicity, Reduktion der Mannigfaltigkeit auf einen Begriff. Okay, what is the job of the artist? The reduction of multiplicity, Mannigfaltigkeit, into one term. He says, what is the, and he has recourse here to a philosopher, Heinrich Rickertz, who was, I think, teaching in either Munich or Göttingen, and he published a book, Die Grenzen der naturwissenschaftlichen Begriffsbildung, the limits of scientific terminology. And this is a book that Sternheim read, and from which he got this idea that what you need to do in life is to overcome multiplicity. Now that's very scary. Okay, if you are not tolerant of multiplicity, but if you want to reduce multiplicity to one term, and he says this is what an artist does. The artist, ich muss see where I'm going to start here, dass nur der Künstler die Mannigfaltigkeit überwinden kann, indem er Bilder gibt, die nicht misszuverstehen sind. Die Notwendigkeit jedes Kunstwerks wird definiert. In einem jeden sei die dargestellte Welt mit ihren Mannigfaltigkeiten zu einem Begriff gebändigt. What the artist does is he takes the multiplicity of the world in all its variations, in its Mannigfaltigkeit. Der Begriff Mannigfaltigkeit plays a key role in the Snob. When Christian thinks about it, he thinks da-dam, da-dam, da-da. What was the word that I am just thinking about? And it comes up as a Mannigfaltigkeit. Okay, so it comes up here, and of course Christian is actually to some degree a parody or a portrait, not even a portrait, but inspired by Rathenau. And the begriff Mannigfaltigkeit is, of course, one. Rathenau was a polymath, was extraordinarily gifted and had mannigfaltige talents. Anyway, so the work of the artist consists of reducing multiplicity of phenomena to its essence. Now, if you combine that's the artist, and he makes this clear in an essay about Van Gogh, and he says that Van Gogh, und so wird das Werk Van Goghs allen Zeiten den erschöpfenden Begriff für das südliche Frankreich sein. An artist reduces the appearance of multiple phenomena to the very essence and works out what is the truth, what is the core of human beings or our purpose in life. So that is what you get here behind this Muscat. That is what it is. I mean, that is not. That's why I said it's not funny. That is deeply depressing.
Yeah, but doesn't he make fun of that?
No, he doesn't. And you see, and he doesn't. He thinks that is why I think he gets crazy and depressed. That's not a funny writer. You think this is satirical, but it really isn't. He claims that is the truth. That is, unfortunately, how human beings are.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he admires that.
But you have no alternative. He says there's no alternative. And if you think about it, when he builds Belle Maison, okay, who is coming? Everybody's coming for the free sandwiches. And he sees it all. He can see how people behave.
Sarcastic.
Yeah, but he says, what's the alternative? Okay, let's look at the next play. And let's see how he does it. What is truly astounding, okay, is that to some degree this play is about selling his wife, and on the basis of the money that she brings in from these guys, he is having his pleasure. That is the way, that is what Sternheim says, that's how the world works. And Nietzsche would not really disagree, unfortunately, and nor would Freud. It just would put it in a more elegant way. It is so vulgar that it is upsetting how vulgar it is. But that is the power of Sternheim. It's a very powerful play.
Yeah, there's a very old Spanish expression, cornudo y contento.
Huh?
Cornudo y contento. It means the guy is coupled and he's happy because he gets the money.
Okay, let's go look at Maske, ein paar Löcher weitergeschnallt. Okay, so now we have this one. I mean, it is depressing, I'm sorry to say, but it's getting more depressing before it gets to be funny again. Because we're doing Kafka next week, and that guy is really loopy. Yes?
Sternheim's philosophy, which I don't think fits Theobald fully, is really sort of a description of the anti-hero who sees everything clearly, never lies, but conforms on the outside. I'm not talking about Theobald here. I'm talking about Sternheim's ideal as described by you in his words. And that conforms to the anti-hero as in The Stranger or the literature of the 50s. And in the 50s in the United States, you had the hipster, which very different from the hippie. The hipster would have a job, but his nightlife was cultural, you know. And Mort Saul was the epitome of the hipster. He was a stand-up comic, but he never discussed anything but he had a newspaper, he had a perfect suit on, and the one little sign was a turtleneck. And he was very skeptical and cynical, and he would read the paper, but he would never get upset. Then that moved into the beatnik phase, where people acted out.
You know, but all of this, and it's interesting. But if you think about all of this, and you think about the 50s and 60s movement, and all that, there was always a Überbau, a superstructure of ideas and idealism. And what is so shocking about Sternheim is that it is absolutely devoid of idealism. It doesn't matter to him at all. He thinks it doesn't, es greift nicht. Yeah? It has no impact at all. Idealism on what makes somebody truly happy. You can talk a good game, and that will be your outside. You can talk about Liederlichkeit, that becomes the Maske, that becomes the verbiage. But underneath that, it is brutal.
He's totally cynical. That's the whole. He isn't advocating any of this. And you go into this.
But it is not cynical. Okay, 1513, famous book, Il Principe, the Prince, Machiavelli's book, 500 years ago. Maybe we should have done 1513, 1813, 1913, 2013. Okay, is about the exact same thing. You've got to recognize what makes people tick. And you know, it doesn't matter what good game you talk politically. The only laws that you can enforce are those, and you see it in Syria now, are those that you can back up with arms. And it is the same structure actually here. You need to recognize what the reality of people's desire is, and that is what drives the structure. Sorry, 1 second.
Well, as you're talking, I'm wondering, isn't that what naturalism is? Right? I mean, the whole Hauptmann and others around that
time. It was just around that time.
But people are, I mean, often we want to contrast Sternheim as a kind of expressionist with Hauptmann, but you seem to want to reduce Sternheim to the same scientificism.
I don't want to reduce him to anything, and also not to scientificism. He was very fond and was read in the Naturwissenschaften, but he wasn't ultimately going that way. Right. What he wanted to understand was really what in the inside, when people are in their stille Kämmerlein, in their bedroom, what do they really want? And how do they really behave? And why is it that we have very clearly have this double morality, double standard of morality that you can see, and this is why I was so into all these marriages, right? Everybody was behaving in a very crazy way, yet we think about Victorianism as people being very proper. You have the propriety, and that is the level of language, where we have good language, and there's a beauty of Niederlichkeit, and we have utopianisms, and we have social idealism, and economic idealism, but when push comes to shove, that's not what matters to people. The language and ideas are on a different plane from the way people really behave and what really makes them happy. And once we get to Freud, you will see that ultimately the structure is the same. And when we're talking about, Woodstocks and the beatniks and the hippies, and we're talking about romanticism, which is a form of neo-romanticism, really. You can talk a good game, but the way the people behaved was very, was antithetical to what they said. I mean, look at the exploitation of women even during that time. I didn't really hear about that.
But they were talking about the way the world should be. He's trying to talk about the way the world is.
He's trying, because he says it doesn't really matter about how the world should be. That doesn't, it has no, that's in that area. That's what satirized with him. Okay, let's look at Christian Musker. And I actually really wanted to talk about Rathenau. The foil for that, okay, really is Rathenau was really different. And you can see this in the third play. So you could see that the next play, The Snob, is about, well, you could say it's about assimilation. It's about, okay, what's the snob about? What drives the snob?
He wants to marry the aristocracy.
I'm sorry?
He wants to marry the aristocracy.
He wants to marry the aristocracy, so he's got money, okay? He's already, basically we are where Theobald is, just a little bit higher. We are at this plateau, he's got the money. And now what he wants is, he wants social recognition in addition to the money, okay? So how does he do it?
He marries into it.
Well, yeah,
So
that's it. Okay, good. I'm going to work in this graph. Okay, how does he do it?
It's the very last line of the play. He lies. He says that he's the illegitimate
but he's
son
already
of
married
Mary.
at that time. We're talking about the dad. Okay, you always give me the punchline away. Sit on it for a minute. Okay, sit on this for a minute because we need that one as a climax. God forgot it.
Okay. You asked.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't ask. Okay, did you want to offer?
Well, I was just thinking this goes back to the Nietzschean sense too, that he becomes in a sense an artist of his own life, where he's structuring the appearances in such a way as to be able to pass.
Good. Okay, we actually have to think Machiavelli again, right?
Right.
Okay, he is constructing an appearance that is, you could say this is always dealt with as it's a play about assimilation, that Christian assimilates toward the upper crust. But it's not so. It's more a matter of mimicry. Okay, he creates the appearance, and this is why he's sending his parents away, the appearance of being part of that group. But it is a strategic, or you can call it a strategic assimilation, because he's using this appearance. He knows that those guys are poor, they have to marry. He has to marry off the daughter. And in fact, you could argue, and here is a connection to the other play, that this Graf is basically prostituting his daughter. He's marrying her off for the money. Right? That's why we need the punchline, okay? The punchline is important because how do you get her sexually aroused? This class only will basically sleep with their own kind. So he's got to say this. If he wants to have any fun at night, he's got to make her excited about him. And she will only really, when push comes to shove and you're in bed, you've got no clothes on and the light is off and you don't talk, okay? So she needs to be excited, and she's only going to be excited if it's one of her own kind. Okay, so here too, he employs a kind of mimicry. But before that, in order to get to this Graf to consent to the marriage, he has to create this Maske, this shell. But beneath that, and that again makes him a hero, and that's why he's so recognizable to his father, he remains the old Maske, who knows precisely what he wants, and he gets it by constructing basically this shell. So on the outside, here's the presentation to the outside, he presents himself as being indistinguishable from them. He has mastered all the forms, which is why he has this mentor whom he dismisses at the very beginning, this Hilda or whatever her name is, and behind that, he is basically a steel bullet. He is himself with his desires and with his ambition. Now the desire that we had, the very primitive animal type desire that we had in Theobald, here desire morphs into something more than desire. It becomes ambition. There's a very good definition of ambition by Walter Rathenau. This is actually a first edition of Walter Rathenau's Kritik der Zeit. This was a bestseller. So Kritik der Zeit from Walter Rathenau was a bestseller at the time. It was 1911. It's actually January 1912, and is an analysis, really a bunch of essays, and that analyzed the way the times work. And I actually want to read you when we look at. Only in 10 minutes, when we look at 1913, I want to read you the Schlussbemerkung, where you can really see also the idealism. We have to talk about the idealism. He's still present in Walter Rathenau. So this book had a huge impact, and it was the opposite of what he says here. So you have this mask, and behind that you have this steel bullet, this drive toward ambition. And Rathenau, actually, I think I have it at some. Argued that everybody needs to believe in something, and ambition, there can be assimilation and you can be driven by that, but ambition is something that is irreducible, and it is, here it is, sorry about that. I wanted to read it. It's an absolutely fantastic quote about that. So muss die banalste und rätselhafteste Leidenschaft, der Ehrgeiz, Ambition, der Ehrgeiz, zur Verstärkung der bewegenden Mechanisierungskräfte ins Ungemessene gesteigert werden. In order to drive modern industrial life, Mechanisierung, that is his key term, you have to steigern, you have to accelerate, you have to increase, you strengthen ambition into the nth degree. Banal ist diese Leidenschaft, wenn man in ihr nur den Inbegriff der am Durchschnitt messenden und darüber hinaus tretenden Appetite erblickt. This Leidenschaft, this passion, ambition, is only banal if you think about it as a bundle of your appetites. Rätselhaft wird sie, an enigma, ambition becomes an enigma, wenn man alle materielle Begierde abspaltet, if you split off from it all material desires. Okay? Und erkennt, dass danach etwas übrig bleibt, das sie alle an Heißhunger und Nachhaltigkeit übertrifft. So when you split off material desire from ambition, that you want to have money, when you have money, he says, you still have ambition, you still have this drive, and it becomes very enigmatic. This guy has money, Christian. He doesn't need it. He's got Theobald already. He's got that, which is why this is the next play. But he's got something else. He's got this drive why he wants to marry into aristocracy. And now Rathenau says this. This is actually a text that Sternheim definitely knew. Etwas wie das Streben nach Geltung. Und zwar ohne Hinblick auf die mittelbaren Vorteile, die aus ihr erwartet werden können. Vielmehr ein Streben nach Geltung, selbst nach Anerkennung, Bewunderung, Beneidung. Okay, I'm going to translate that. So after you split off the material part, which there happens, there's still a core of ambition. And what you want, you don't want any advantages, but what you want are Geltung, you want to account for something. Anerkennung, you want to be acknowledged. Bewunderung, you want to be admired. Beneidung, you want to be envied. That, he says, and that's very different from Sternheim, okay? That, he says, is the core of the self. Once you're materially satisfied, you are Theobald. What do you want? You want to be admired, acknowledged, loved. You want to have a self that is more, now we're at the next level, that is more than just your material need. And that's why Master says, you really have elevated that to another level. You have that. And Rathenau was very clear about this. Sternheim knew this, and Sternheim was Rathenau's friend between 1911 and 1914. In fact, when the Snob failed. No, actually it wasn't the Snob, was the play before, I think it was Don Juan. He did a play before the Rosa. It was called Don Juan. It was a historical play. And it was absolutely a scandal. It was absolutely booed. And Sternheim, which was in a Berlin theater, was humiliated. Rathenau went up to him, escorted him out. He was a famous industrialist. Everybody knew who he was. Escorted him out of the theater and drove him home in his own limousine, open limousine, all through Berlin, to make sure that it was clear that he was supporting this playwright. I mean, that's the way Rathenau was. He was extraordinary in his way. Okay, so you have this play, which is about finding your essence, okay? But it is a little bit more. Yeah.
But that's not your essence.
I know.
No. I mean, you know, that's not. That's that he gets the admiration and from other people. So it's just living to the outside. It's not an inner core.
If you really think about that, okay? I just want to say this because this is like on camera now. Last night my daughter was crying, and I said, why is that? Why are you crying? And she says, I'm so alone. I mean, she's with a house full of her family. She says she's alone. What she was really saying is because her best friends are all living someplace else, she doesn't have a best friend who will acknowledge her, value her, elevate her, acknowledge her as a human being. That's what Rathenau means. Rathenau was not married, had no family. For him, ambition and to know people and to be acknowledged by them validated him as a human being because he wasn't getting that recognition from his father. He recognizes it as a core desire of human beings once the material needs have been satisfied. A core desire, even though it comes from the outside, but your craving, your need to be acknowledged as a human being are very intense. So that would be the second level of the play. And now,
but that's not what he wants. He wants to get the highest that he can achieve, that he can possibly achieve.
And what is that?
So nobody's better than him.
That's right. And what does it really boil down to? Once you have married into the aristocracy, you get recognition. That's all it is. And you are unassailable, and everybody has to pay attention to you. That's why Rathenau's card was open.
And how is that admirable? That's not admirable.
It's not admirable. I'm only describing it as a dynamics. I'm not valuing it in any which way. It's not admirable. It is, but it is what Rathenau describes. It's a need. It's a fundamental need that human beings are acknowledged. You can even see it in Elder
here.
Okay,
but then he just writes it how it is, and not. I mean, the way you present it is as if you want to say that Carl Sternheim says this is good, but
I'm not saying no. Okay, that's wrong. I scrap that. I'm not saying it's good. No, I mean, and this is no. I mean, and that just goes to you also. I mean, what I'm always saying. It's always analytical. I never value it. Okay, I never say it's good or it's bad. It would be vermessen, total fool. I don't do that. No, I am saying that what Sternheim learned from Rathenau, with whom he became friends in 1911. And was one of his few friends during that period, because it was a very lonely period for Rathenau at that time, and he was close to Sternheim at this, not close, and so they knew each other, was that there's something else. Once you have the money, why wouldn't you be happy? For Theobald Maske, what is driving this guy? And that's why I took this quote. I need to once say a few words because we're almost out of time. You have 10 minutes. We can look at 1913. Okay, let's just look at 1913. I will take it offline. Okay, so when we have 1913, again, it's a different. What drives the play? What's the play about this time?
Couldn't get it in English.
Couldn't get it in.
Could not find this play in English in all the libraries.
Could I get the play?
No, I didn't get it either in Germany.
Oh, really?
I didn't get it.
Ah. Hier ist eine Erstausgabe.
Well,
that's a German edition. And not just like, but This is a printout from online. It is online for free. I printed it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just basically put the text in the Google search box and it comes out as Gutenberg or Zeno, free online. Oh, I think it's even Amazon.com.
Right,
Free.
it's published as a trilogy.
Yeah.
And I think
And
it's
it's
a
and the
fairly recent book.
the German text is free, and it was online. And you have it also?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah. Oh, look at that.
That's the English.
Oh, yeah. That's the English. That's the
Okay.
English. Eric Bentley. That's and it's cool. Very cool translation. Okay, so sorry about it, but okay, Betty.
The MIT library has a Gesamtwerk on Sternheim, so 10, 11 volumes. So I was able to
Wow. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, what's the essence of that play? Okay, so in this case, we actually have we had a father-mother thing, okay, on a parental thing in the first play. We have a father-son, not conflict but context, and the father in the end, as is very rare, acknowledges that his son did well. And in 1913, how many of you have read that actually? Anyone? Okay. And in 1913, we have a father-daughter conflict. Okay? And the father-daughter, what's her name? Sophie?
Sophie.
Yeah. Where's them? Okay, so we have Sophie. Okay. There are actually 3 children, and actually one of the best characters, you have to admit, is Philipp Ernst. I love it when he comes up. That is a successful comic figure. He is wonderful. Oscar Wilde did it better, but he is wonderful, and that is consistent, and I enjoyed him very much. So there's Philipp Ernst, who is a total dandy, and then there's the other daughter.
Ottilie.
What's her name?
Ottilie.
Ottilie. Oh yeah, she's like Goethe's Ottilie. Okay, so it's the idealist, and then there's Sophie, and Sophie is the counter one to Christian Musker. And she represents ruthless capitalism. Okay, she converts to Protestantism so she can get the Dutch to sell arms. But Christian actually bests her because he actually, this is very interesting about the play, Sternheim always saw the war coming. And for him, and that also for his character Christian, the war is basically just a big economic machine that's going to produce more money. And you've just got to be in the right position. Now, Sophie wants to clog up arms production by getting this big job from the Dutch government, but Christian doesn't want that because he sees the war coming, and for that reason, of course, he wants his production free so that he can produce arms for his fatherland, for the German government. So in the end, he says, he produces a scandal, but that they're Catholic, and therefore that they don't get the job from the Dutch. But that is not what the core of the play really is. She represents ruthless capitalism in the way you would think Christian Musker should actually represent capitalism, and he doesn't. And he pulls back. And he gives her a big speech, and that's also at did one of you pick it out? It's also in the third act. Act 3, scene 1.
Where's the secretary in this?
The secretary is an ideal. Oh, okay, the secretary.
I think he's the focus of the whole trilogy.
Fine. Okay, he's an idealist. He's with Ottilie. Okay. Klein is interesting. Why is he interesting, Klein? William Klein. He represents idealism, the youth movement. But if you really read it, now I feel a little uneasy to talk about that, because you haven't read that. It's really almost an anticipation of the Hitler movement.
Exactly, that's the whole thing. He sees this movement. Yeah. Everybody is impotent except for the secretary,
you could say,
who really understands how things run.
Yeah, you can see that that's a political counterpart to the way that capitalism is organized. Capitalism is organized top down. It's always a hierarchy. You have the workers down here.
But as I said in my email to you, we're in the age of administrators.
Yeah.
They may not be on top, but they're basically running everything these these days.
But I can't get into that right now because I'm out of time, and I need to talk about one item, and that is cyclische Ökonomie. Okay, and here you have the Rathenau principle. Okay, because what is interesting about Walter Rathenau, and this is in, you remember now when we talked about Mann ohne Eigenschaften, Paul Anheim in Mann ohne Eigenschaften is an image or a reflection of Walter Rathenau. Musil absolutely hated him. Why was Walter Rathenau was truly despised. He was admired and he was despised because on the one hand, he was a writer, he was an artist, he was wealthy, he was money fetish. People were really jealous of him. In addition to that, he had something very interesting going for himself. On the one hand, he was a capitalist. His company was was AEG, producing electricity for Germany at the time, and of course that was a huge growth spurt. But at the same time, he was critical of capitalism, and he argued against consumerism. And he said, you guys really need to you need to control your resources. He was basically a Whole Foods guy. And he said, you are completely wasting our resources. You need to focus on what you're doing. And he opposed ruthless consumerism. And he recognized in his writing that mechanization was the key to the 20th century. It was on the one hand, the reason why we have cheap goods, and on the other hand, why we have so many people out of labor. And if you're looking at our issues right now in Congress, and when we're looking at why we're not able to produce more employment, well, because a lot of jobs are done better by machines. So there are issues that Rathenau anticipated in his writings about mechanization. He recognized this as the key term for the 20th century, for all its social problems. At the same time, he was extraordinary in recognizing that there is a form of ethical behavior within capitalism that you can counteract capitalism a certain way by being ethical about it, and that is not to get plastic bags, not to throw things out, by having good designs. In fact, all the things that Christian strangely advocates in the third act of this play, when Sophie says to him, how come you have all these strange ideas all of a sudden? Weren't you always a capitalist? No, he says, this is really what I feel, and I want to read you at the very end, the Schlussbemerkung of this very famous book by Walter Rathenau, zur Kritik der Zeit, which was sold thousands of copies, hundreds of thousands of copies. It was like 20 editions by 1929. Eine unpolemische, aber persönliche Bemerkung mag diese Kontroverse aufklären und beschließen. Ich kämpfe nicht für den jüdischen Reserveleuten, and this has to do with the Jews. Ich bedauere auch nicht den Juden, der sich staatliche Verantwortung wünscht und sie nicht erhält. Wer Verantwortung sucht, der hat sie. Vor sich, vor Menschen, vor Gott. Wer Einlass erbitten sich an Stellen begibt, die man nicht wo man ihn nicht haben will, der tut mir leid. This is actually also, because we didn't really talk about Jewish assimilation. He says, the Jews ought to be blamed to some degree themselves, because if you want to be somewhere where you're not wanted, I really feel sorry for yourself. You need to set out and do your own thing. That goes back to what Sternheim was saying, go out and do your own thing. Ich kämpfe gegen das Unrecht, das in Deutschland geschieht, denn ich sehe Schatten aufsteigen, wohin ich mich wende. I am fighting against injustice wherever I see it, because I see shadows rise up. Ich sehe sie, wenn ich abends durch die gelben Straßen von Berlin gehe. I see them when I'm going through the noisy streets of Berlin at night. Wenn ich die Insolenz unseres wahnsinnig gewordenen Reichtums erblicke. I see those shadows when I see the insolence, when I see the awfulness of our wealth that has become crazy. Now, this also would apply to 2013. Wenn ich die Nichtigkeit kraftstrotzender Worte vernehme, when I hear the nothingness of words that are bursting with apparent or with seeming power, oder von pseudo-germanischer Exklusivität berichten höre, or when I hear people talk about a Hofdamen Appetit zusammenzuckt. Okay, so I have to read this again. Wenn ich die Nichtigkeit kraftstrotzender Worte vernehme oder von pseudo-germanischer Exklusivität berichten höre, die vor Zeitungsartikeln und Hofdamen Appetit zusammenzuckt. So he is seeing very clearly where pre-Weimar Germany is going. And he says, you know, it makes me feel uneasy. Eine Zeit ist nicht deshalb sorgenlos, weil der Leutnant strahlt und der Attaché voller Hoffnung ist. A time is not without anxieties because the lieutenant, what is a lieutenant?
It's
A lieutenant, because the lieutenant smiles at you and the diplomat is full of hope. Seit Jahrzehnten ist Deutschland Seit Jahrzehnten hat Deutschland keine ernstere Periode durchlebt als diese. Das Stärkste aber, was in solchen Zeiten geschehen kann, ist das Unrecht abtun. Okay, so he says it's a very serious period and I see lots of social injustice and I will fight against that. Now this was resented of Rathenau because he was seen as a wealthy capitalist and at the same time he was arguing for basically a conservationist economics, an ethical economics, and people could not bring the two together. And of course he was murdered. Anyway.
Can I see how his name is spelled?
Yeah. So he's actually truly extraordinary. So after this play, after he established Theobald Musk as a hero, after Sternheim wrote a play about ambition as another ingredient, also necessary ingredient of the soul to be recognized as a human being. He wrote a play in which he really said it's almost like a memorial to Rathenau, where he says, no, what is really needed is yes, we do need capitalism in a certain way because it does create work, but what we do need to have is also a conservationist policy. Capitalist conservationist policy. People could not get the two together. So it's very complex. Now with these sets of ideas that were impervious to political improvements or utopias, a man like this could not function in the Weimar Republic. Because what he had to say, the analyses he had to offer, were no longer congruent with the times. Because that's not where the culture was going. You have a rising right, represented by the idealist, as you pointed out, and in fact it is a description of the Romantic Youth Movement, 1913, but when you read it, it is eerily prescient of a description of the Hitler movement, the Nazi movement, that is sucking in youth that are completely disoriented. And a man who did not subscribe to political ideologies as a quick fix to what was wrong with the system really was out of sync with the times in the Weimar Republic, and he was completely ignored. He went to Belgium. He stayed in Belgium, and this is now really went to Belgium, was actually lived for a time in Switzerland at Lake Constance, where there's really nothing in a village with like 700 people. He got divorced from Thea Sternheim in 1927 because he was unfaithful to her, left and right, and he spent her money, and she finally had enough. And the very moment Thea Sternheim left, Pamela Wedekind stepped in and went with him to Switzerland. Pamela Wedekind actually then married him in 1930. They lived together in Belgium, and she left him in 1934. They got divorced, and she went with Gustav Gründgen to Berlin and became a big deal because Gründgen, of course, was intendant of the Preußische Staatstheater and a big figure in the Nazi period. And of course, he helped the Jews. Okay, we don't know who they were, but of course he said so. And we of course looked at Gründgens already when we looked at Klaus von Mephisto. And she stayed there till 1942. And in 1942, she accepted a traveling engagement, like play for the troops. So she could go to Brussels to visit Sternheim. She knew he was there. So in August 1942, she came to visit him one more time. And he was pretty much down and out. In 1940, he had met a woman as soon as Pamela left, Henny Carbonara, who was taking care of him. So he'd always somebody who took care of him. But they were living because, of course, after he got divorced from Thea, he didn't have money anymore, and so he had to live on his income. But in 1933, when the Nazis came to power, his works were forbidden, so he had no source of income whatsoever, and his plays were not performed because they were really out of step with the time. So Sternheim was dependent on payments by his friend Hans Herzog, Jewish guy. But of course, when the Nazis came to Belgium, that stopped too, because by 1940, Herzog himself had to flee. So he lived for another 2 years, and then 3 months after Pamela had visited him, he died of pneumonia. But he was 64 years old, but he was just completely finished. He was so marched onto the culture, and he knew it, and he really didn't want to live anymore. Thea Sternheim, who had been divorced, of course, from him in 1927, had left Berlin to live in France in 1932. She was arrested. She was sent to Goethe concentration camp, where she was for a while. She escaped from there, and then she lived sort of slightly tolerated by the Germans in an apartment in Paris, and was just trying to muddle through the war. Her daughter, Dorothea Sternheim, joined the resistance. In 1943, she was captured, and she was sent to Ravensbrück, and she spent 2 years in a concentration camp. She was liberated from Ravensbrück in 1945, and she died of cancer in 1954. And I sort of like to add insult to injury, I guess. Thea Sternheim, the elder, was paid reparations for the 2 years that her daughter had spent in Ravensbrück, if you can imagine. One of the wealthiest women of all times in Berlin was dependent on reparations payments because her daughter had spent 2 years in Ravensbrück. I mean, it's just really crazy. So she went, when she was 80 years old, she went to live with Agnes, her older daughter, Agnes Löwenstein, who had then married a Lorca translator and was living in Basel, and they were all actually musicians. So that's the way life plays. So she was then dependent on the older daughter, whom she had abandoned for the Sternheim. So to some degree, you know, we look at the way lives play out. That's very tragic. And Pamela Wedekind, so she remarried in 1941, Charles Renier, an actor in Berlin, and they had many children, and they are sort of, were just written up actually this is the offspring of Pamela Wedekind. So this beautiful girl, it's her granddaughter. So this is her son, and that's the granddaughter, great-great-granddaughter. So, you know, this part really of the family lived happily ever after. So there's a write-up on FAZ über gescheite Enkelkinder und amüsante Großväter, Anatole Renier. So Anatole is one of 3 children Pamela had with Charles Renier, and that is his granddaughter, who is beautiful, and she grew up in San Diego, and now lives in Germany, Ruthie. So that's the way, so the Sternheims are wiped out, but the Wedekinds live happily ever after. I will see you with Franz Kafka. Good night.
Thank you.